Government work for us, or do we work for the government? Is it the government's job to protect the natural rights of the people, or does it exist to protect the people at the expense of their natural rights? Do the threats we face in our everyday lives require us to turn to the government to overcome those threats, or do the largest threats we face come from the government itself? Tonight, terror, the nanny state, and you. Terror has been a staple of governments for thousands of years. Because terror induces fear and paranoia, it is a useful tool for the government to keep people compliant and obedient. Political leaders know this, so throughout history they have scared us, using scapegoats, real and imagined external enemies, and our innate fear of the unknown, and the natural tendency of all human beings towards risk aversion, all with the goal of robbing us of our dignity, of our natural rights as human beings, of our property, and even in some cases of our lives. The framers of the Constitution attempted to prevent this from happening by writing in the Constitution that no government can take life, liberty, or property by legislation or by command, but only after a fair jury trial. As we know, from slavery to abortion, from the Alien and Sedition Acts to the Patriot Act, from waterboarding to Guantanamo Bay, this has not worked out as the framers portrayed it. Why do we let ourselves get scared into submission? The truth is that we scare ourselves, because fear is also generally a useful survival strategy. Steering clear of what the government tells you to fear is a lot safer than rushing headfirst into the danger. So here is the lesson. The government uses fear to its everlasting advantage, because by steering clear of what it tells us to fear, we rush headfirst into the hands of the nanny state, taking false comfort in the omnipresent embrace of the arms of the welfare and warfare producing government. The government effectively says, don't worry about freedom. Just pay your taxes and we will fight your wars and keep you safe and keep you healthy. So it was after 9/11 when our elected representatives enacted laws that on their face gave away our rights while willingly granting government broad and expansive surveillance, detention, spying, and war-making powers. But the march toward a totalitarian state was obvious even a generation earlier. It was at the outset of the war on drugs, when the criminality caused by the prohibition of drugs was used to justify the government's declaration of an all-too-literal war on its own citizens. The government so demonized drug users and dealers that almost everyone, even the courts, which are the guardians of the Constitution, looked the other way as natural rights were curtailed and constitutional protections were weakened in the name of drug prohibition. First, the government created the targets with prohibition. Then it demonized the targets with legislation. Then it reduced their constitutional rights with public approval. Then it reduced the rights of the rest of us in the name of fighting terror. Today, financially strapped states and municipalities across the country merely nibble at the edges of their fiscal problems, but still hold sacrosanct the bloated government budgets that keep the people temporarily happy. Do cops really need helicopters and tanks? Should the government really create dependency it cannot afford? Should government workers be compensated for life? Are people really dying in the streets as the government claimed when it took over health care? In the meantime, our greatest national security threat is not young, unskilled, poor, or even hateful radicals, but the monstrous national debt our government has accrued by pretending to protect us from its mostly manufactured and largely overblown threats. So when Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a master user of the government to manipulate people, said that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, that was mostly correct. Since FDR demonstrated that the government knows so well how to use fear, we have the government to fear as well. There is nothing so terrifying as the government when it builds on fear. Jefferson understood this when he said that the long march of history leads to stronger government and less freedom. But why should that be so? If we are serious about freedom, if the Constitution means what it says, if we have really hired a government to protect life, liberty, and property rather than assault them, then we cannot succumb to our fears. We must master them. The road that fear paves leads to a government that acts as master and treats us as serfs. When we allow the government to scare us, we are allowing it to dehumanize us, to coddle or coerce us into mediocrity. But our future, our progress, the actualization of our limitless potential, our search for truth, our acquisition of happiness. All these rely on personal courage, innovation, and individuality. And they rely on what we defend on this show every night of the week: freedom. Tomorrow, Freedom Watch will bring you a special interview with a man who used fear to enhance the power of the government during terrifying times, Donald Rumsfeld. You can decide for yourself after you hear him if we are safer and freer or more enslaved because of his work. From New York, defending freedom every night of the week. So long, America.